Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're diving into the world of Windows administration.
Ooh,
Yeah, it's a big one.
a topic.
And we're going to be using an article called Top 20 Plus Windows Administrator Interview Questions 2025 to guide our exploration.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
So think of it as like we're going behind the scenes of like what keeps the digital world running.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's a critical role. A lot of people don't realize how much goes into it.
Right.
It blends so much technical know-how, but you also have to have a knack for problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just keeping the computers running. It's about making sure that organizations can function seamlessly.
Right. So it's like the backbone of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly does a Windows administrator, like what do they do day to day?
Okay, so imagine you're like the architect and the construction crew of a digital city.
Okay.
You're building the entire network infrastructure, right? Setting up user accounts and making sure all the systems from the servers to the individual computers can communicate with each other.
So it's like a whole city planning kind
Yeah.
of role.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's fascinating work.
So it's not just about setting things up. It's about like constant maintenance, troubleshooting, that kind of thing too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Think of it as a never-ending cycle of building, optimizing, and fixing.
Mm,
1 minute, you're setting up user permissions. The next minute, you're troubleshooting a server issue. And then the next minute, you're helping someone get to the printer.
right. Like you said, jack of all trades.
Totally.
So the article mentions this thing, Active Directory, as a key concept. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. So Active Directory, or AD for short, is like the central nervous system of a Windows-based network.
Okay.
It's a massive database that stores information about every user, every computer, every resource on the network.
Mm.
It's like a giant phone book, but it doesn't just list everybody's contact details. It controls who has access to what.
So without Active Directory, would it just be chaos?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Active Directory allows administrators to manage permissions,
Mhm.
apply security policies, and keep everything running smoothly.
Okay, so that's a very important thing.
It is incredibly important.
Okay, so within this digital city that you're mentioning, what are Active Directory domain controllers?
Okay, so domain controllers, or DCs, are like the city halls of your network.
Right.
They hold the master copies of the Active Directory database and manage all the communication and authentication that happens within the network.
So if the Active Directory is the central nervous system, the domain controllers are the brain.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
They're the ones making decisions, processing requests, and ensuring that everyone is who they say they are.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And how do you keep all of this crucial information safe? Like, I'm guessing backups are pretty important.
Backups are the lifeline of any IT system, especially Active Directory.
Right.
Can you imagine losing all of that data?
Yeah.
It would be like the city suddenly forgetting where everything is and who everyone is.
That sounds like a disaster.
It would be a complete disaster. So how do you back up something as complex as Active Directory?
Yeah.
Well, the article mentions using system state backups through a tool called NT Backup.
Okay.
It's a tried and true method. It creates a copy of all the critical system files, including the Active Directory database.
Mm.
And to be extra safe, you want to have backups on multiple domain controllers,
Mm.
just like you'd have multiple backup generators in a city in case one fails.
Okay, so backups, multiple copies, check.
Right.
The article also mentions something called Active Directory partitions. What are those all about?
Okay, so partitions are a way to organize the massive amount of information in Active Directory.
Okay.
Think of them as different departments in our digital city hall.
Okay.
You have your schema partitions, which define the structure of the entire directory configuration. Partitions hold information about the physical layout of the network. You've got application partitions. They store data related to applications and domain partitions, which contain information specific to each domain.
So it's like having different filing cabinets for different types of information, all within that city hall, the domain controller.
Exactly, and it helps keep everything organized and efficient.
Okay.
And that level of organization is crucial when you're managing a network with thousands of users, computers, and resources.
It sounds like a Windows administrator needs to be very organized and detail-oriented.
100%.
So we've got the city hall and its information and the backups, the organization. But how do you control what happens within the city itself?
That's where group policies come into play.
Okay.
Think of them as the laws and regulations that govern how users and computers behave on the network.
Okay.
So like you were saying, speed limits on internet usage or making sure everyone has the same fire safety protocols in place.
Right, right.
It's all about order and consistency.
So it sounds like a lot of power, but also a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
Okay, well, let's talk about DNS and WNS servers. The article mentions those, the traffic lights and street signs of our digital city, making sure everyone can find their way around and that information is flowing efficiently.
Yeah, good analogy.
So tell me more about these DNS and WYNS servers.
All right, so DNS stands for Domain Name System, and it's essentially the phone book of the internet.
Okay.
We humans, we like to use easy to remember names like google.com or marketing server.
Right,
But computers, they speak in numbers and IP addresses.
right.
So DNS translates those human-friendly names into the numerical IP addresses that computers understand.
So when I type in a website name, DNS is working behind the scenes to figure out where to send me.
That's exactly right. It's like a super efficient GPS system that directs traffic in the digital world.
That's incredible. So what about WN servers? What role do they play?
Okay, so WNS, or Windows Internet Name Service, is a little bit older and less common now,
Mm.
but it served a similar purpose, particularly on local networks.
Okay.
It helped computers find each other by name within a smaller network environment.
So DNS is like the big city map and WNS is like the neighborhood directory.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
But the article also mentions something called DNS scavenging. What is that?
So DNS scavenging is like the city's cleanup crew for the DNS database.
Okay.
It goes through and removes any outdated or stale records, ensuring that the DNS phone book is accurate and up to date.
That sounds important.
It's very important, especially things on the network are constantly changing.
Right. And it also mentioned forcing a DNS dynamic update. What would be the reason for doing that?
So sometimes because of network changes, the DNS records need a little push to refresh themselves.
Okay.
Maybe computer's IP address has changed or a server has been renamed.
Mm-hmm.
So forcing a dynamic update makes sure that the DNS database has the latest information. It's like telling the city to update its maps after a new road is built.
And how do you actually force this update? Is it a complicated process?
Not at all.
Okay.
You can use a simple command, ipconfig registers, to tell the computer to update its DNS information.
Mm.
You can also restart the net logon service, which is responsible for network logins and often triggers a DNS update as well.
So it's like hitting the refresh button on the DNS database.
Exactly.
I'm starting to feel like I can speak tech.
That's great.
Now, the article also mentioned something about the difference between a thread and a computer process. Can you explain that one to us?
Absolutely. Let's stick with our city analogy.
Okay.
Imagine a large department store in our digital city.
Right.
The entire department store is a process.
Okay.
It has a specific purpose and encompasses many different activities.
So the department store is the process. What are the threads?
The threads are the individual departments within the store.
Gotcha.
You got your clothing department, your electronics department, the housewares department, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
They're all part of the same overall store, but they each have their own specific tasks and functions.
So a process is the big picture, and threads are the smaller tasks working together to make it happen.
Precisely.
Okay.
Just like the departments in a store, all contribute to the function of the store threads within a process, contribute to the execution of that process.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah. It sounds like understanding how processes and threads work is crucial for a Windows administrator. Are there any other key concepts we should cover before we move on?
Well, there's one that's often misunderstood, and that's WNS servers.
Win servers. Yeah, the article touched on them briefly, but I'm still a little fuzzy on what they actually do.
Wait, okay, so think of it this. Way back in the day, before TCP/IP became the standard networks, often use a different protocol called NetBIOS to communicate.
Oh.
WinSS, or Windows Internet Name Service, helped computers on those NetBIOS-based networks find each other by name.
So it was like an early version of DNS, but specifically for NetBIOS networks?
Exactly. As TCP/IP became dominant, the need for WINS diminished, but it's still sometimes used in legacy systems or specific network configurations.
Okay, that makes sense. Like an interesting little historical footnote in the evolution of networking.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of technical ground here. Active Directory, DNS, WNSI, backups, group policies.
It's clear that a Windows administrator needs a strong technical foundation. But what about the personal qualities that are important for success in this role?
That's a great question. Technical skills are essential, but they're only part of the equation. A great Windows administrator is also a problem solver, a communicator, and a bit of a detective.
A detective. I like that. What do you mean by that?
We are often faced with mysterious issues, like a server suddenly stops responding. Users can't access certain files, or a network connection just drops inexplicably.
Yeah.
And it's your job to figure out what's going on, track down the root cause, and come up with a solution.
Right.
It's a lot like detective work, gathering clues, analyzing evidence, and piecing together a puzzle.
I can see how those problem-solving skills would be crucial, especially when you're dealing with those complex systems and frustrated users.
Right.
The article also mentioned the importance of communication skills.
Yeah.
How do those come into play?
Well, think about it. You're the bridge between the technical world and the everyday users who rely on those systems.
Right.
So you might need to explain a technical issue to someone who has no IT background.
Okay.
Or you might need to work with other IT professionals to resolve a complex problem.
Right.
So being able to communicate clearly, both verbally and in writing, is essential.
It's like being a translator speaking both the language of computers and the language of people.
That's a great way to put it.
And I imagine patience is a pretty valuable virtue in this role.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're going to encounter users who are frustrated, confused, or even a bit tech-phobic.
Yeah.
So being able to remain calm, patient, and empathetic is key to providing good support and resolving issues effectively.
So it's a role that demands this unique blend of technical expertise, problem-solving abilities, and people skills.
It really is.
The article also touched on the importance of security. What are some of the key security considerations for a Windows administrator?
Security is paramount.
Yeah.
Think of yourself as the guardian of that digital city.
Right.
You're responsible for protecting its citizens and their valuable data. You need to be constantly vigilant, implementing safeguards, and staying ahead of those potential threats.
That sounds like a high-pressure job.
It can be.
What are some of the specific tools and strategies that Windows administrators use to ensure security?
Well, one of the most fundamental security measures is the firewall. Think of it as the city walls controlling the flow of traffic in and out of the network.
Okay.
It blocks unauthorized access and prevents malicious actors from getting in.
So the firewall is the first line of defense.
Hmm.
What about threats that manage to slip past the firewall?
That's where antivirus software comes in. It acts like the city guard patrolling the streets and looking for any suspicious activity.
Okay.
Antivirus scans files and programs for known malware, quarantining, or removing any threats it finds.
Okay, so firewall and antivirus, those are the essentials. Are there any other security measures that Windows administrators should be aware of?
Oh, absolutely. Security is a multi-layered approach.
Okay.
In addition to firewalls and antivirus, you also need to think about things like strong passwords. Enforcing complex passwords and multi-factor authentication helps prevent unauthorized access. It's like having multiple locks on the city gates.
Okay.
Regular updates, keeping software up to date, is crucial for patching security vulnerabilities. It's like reinforcing the city walls to prevent breaches.
Okay.
And user education, training users to recognize phishing scams and other social engineering tactics is essential. It's like teaching the citizens to be aware of potential dangers and how to avoid them.
So it's like an ongoing process. Security is
It is that.
constantly adapting to new threats and vulnerabilities.
Right.
It's amazing to think about all the work that goes into keeping our digital world running smoothly and securely. It's easy to take it for granted until something goes wrong.
So true.
Speaking of things going wrong, I'm curious, what are some of the biggest challenges that Windows administrators face in their day-to-day work?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is dealing with the unexpected.
Right.
Technology is constantly evolving, and new problems can arise at any moment.
Right.
You might encounter a software bug you've never seen before, a hardware failure that brings down a critical server, or a security threat that exploits a previously unknown vulnerability.
So you need to be adaptable and able to think on your feet.
100%. Being a Windows administrator is all about being resourceful, finding creative solutions, and being able to learn quickly. You also need to be able to work under pressure, because when systems go down, everyone's looking to you to fix it fast.
I can imagine those high-pressure situations can be pretty stressful. What are some other challenges that come with the territory?
Another challenge is keeping up with the constant pace of change in technology. New operating systems, applications, and security threats are emerging all the time.
Yeah.
So a good Windows administrator needs to be a lifelong learner, constantly expanding their knowledge and skills to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not a job for someone who's afraid of learning new things.
Definitely not.
What about dealing with users? I imagine that can be challenging at times.
You're absolutely right. Users can be one of the biggest challenges and sometimes the biggest rewards of being a Windows administrator.
Okay.
You might encounter users who are frustrated, confused, or even resistant to change.
Yeah.
But you also get to help people solve problems, empower them to use technology effectively, and make their digital lives easier.
So it sounds like a role that requires a lot of patience, empathy, and a genuine desire to help others.
It really does.
So we've talked about the technical skills, the problem-solving abilities, communication skills, the security mindset, and the people skills. Is there anything else that's essential for success as a Windows administrator?
Yeah, one more thing that's often overlooked is attention to detail.
Okay.
In this role, even small mistakes can have big consequences.
Right.
You need to be meticulous in your work, double-checking your settings, carefully documenting your procedures, and making sure that every I is dotted and every hic is crossed.
It sounds like a role that requires a lot of focus and precision. So to sum it up, a successful Windows administrator needs a strong technical foundation, a knack for problem-solving, excellent communication skills, a security-first mindset, the patience of a saint, and an eagle eye for detail. Is that about right?
You got it.
Okay.
It's a challenging role, but also incredibly rewarding.
Hmm.
You're the one who keeps things running smoothly, enabling people to do their jobs and connecting them to the digital world.
And it sounds like you're constantly learning and facing new challenges, which keeps things interesting.
Definitely. There's never a dull moment in the life of a Windows administrator. And as technology continues to evolve, the role is only going to become more important and more in demand.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. We've explored the multifaceted world of a Windows administrator, from the technical intricacies of Active Directory and DNS to the critical importance of security and the essential personal qualities that contribute to success.
It's a role that often goes unnoticed until something goes wrong,
Ugh.
but it's truly the backbone of modern organizations.
And it's clear that it's not just about technical skills. You need to be a problem solver, a communicator, a detective, a security expert, and even a bit of a therapist at times.
It's a unique blend of talents, but for those who thrive on challenges and enjoy working with technology, it can be an incredibly fulfilling career path.
So for anyone listening who might be considering a career in Windows administration, what advice would you give them?
I'd say be curious, be persistent, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. There are tons of resources available online, Microsoft documentation community forums, virtual labs, where you can learn and experiment.
And don't be afraid to break things in a safe environment, of course. That's often the best way to learn.
Absolutely. The more you experiment and troubleshoot, the more confident you'll become. And don't underestimate the value of networking. Connect with other IT professionals, attend conferences, join online communities. The IT world is all about collaboration and sharing knowledge.
This deep dive has definitely given me a newfound appreciation for the work that Windows administrators do. It's a hidden world that most of us never think about, but it's essential for keeping our digital lives running smoothly.
It's like the engine room of a ship. You might not see it, but without it, everything would grind to a halt.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, whether you're prepping for an interview, considering a career change, or simply curious about the inner workings of the digital world, we hope this deep dive has given you valuable insights into the fascinating world of Windows administration.
Remember, technology is constantly evolving, so the learning never stops.
Yeah.
Embrace the challenges, stay curious, and keep exploring.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one keeping the digital world spinning. Until next time, happy learning.
WinS servers, yeah, they're less common now, but they were super important in the earlier days of networking.
Okay.
So like back then, before TCP/IP was like the standard thing, networks used a different protocol, NetBIOS, to communicate.
Right.
WinS, or Windows Internet Name Service, helped computers on those NetBIOS networks to find each other by name.
So it was like an early version of DNS, but for those NetBIOS networks specifically?
Exactly. And as TCP/IP became like the dominant thing, the need for WinS decreased, but it's still out there sometimes in like legacy systems or specific configurations.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like an interesting little historical thing in the evolution of networking.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've talked about a lot of technical stuff: Active Directory, DNS, backups, group policies.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
It's pretty clear that a Windows administrator needs a strong technical background. But what about like the personal qualities that are important to be successful in the role?
That's a great question. You know, technical skills are really important, but they're only part of it.
Okay.
A great Windows administrator is also a problem solver, a good communicator, and a bit of the detective.
A detective. I like that. What do you mean by that?
Well, you're often dealing with these mysterious issues, like a server just suddenly stops responding. Users can't get to certain files, or a network connection just drops for seemingly no reason.
Yeah, that happened.
And it's your job to figure out what's going on, track down the root cause, and then find a solution.
Okay.
So it's a lot like being a detective, gathering clues,
Mm.
analyzing evidence, and then putting the pieces together.
Yeah, I can see how those problem-solving skills are going to be really important, especially with complex systems and users who are probably frustrated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The article also mentioned communication skills. How do those come into play?
So think about it. You're kind of like the bridge between that technical world and the everyday users who rely on those systems.
Right.
You might have to explain a technical problem to someone who doesn't have any IT background,
Right.
or you might need to work with other IT professionals to like solve a really complex problem.
Okay.
So you have to be able to communicate clearly both when you're talking and when you're writing. It's essential.
It's like being a translator, speaking both the language of computers and the language of people.
I like that.
And I imagine patience is a pretty valuable virtue in this role.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
You're going to have those users who are frustrated, confused, or maybe even scared of technology a little bit.
Right.
So being able to stay calm and patient and be empathetic, that's key to giving good support and solving those issues effectively.
So it's a role that requires this unique blend of technical expertise, problem-solving abilities, and people skills.
Absolutely.
The article also touched on the importance of security. So what are some of the key security considerations for a Windows administrator?
Security is so important. It really is paramount.
Yeah.
Think of yourself as the guardian of the digital city,
Okay.
responsible for protecting the citizens and all their data.
Makes sense.
So you have to always be on guard, implementing those safeguards, and trying to stay ahead of any threats that could pop up.
It sounds like a pretty high-pressure job.
It can be, yeah.
So what are some of the specific tools and strategies that Windows administrators use to make sure things are secure?
Okay, so one of the most basic security measures is a firewall.
Oh, okay.
Think of it like the city walls controlling all the traffic that's coming in and out of the network.
Okay.
It blocks unauthorized access and prevents bad actors from getting in.
So the firewall is like the first line of defense? What about those threats that get past the firewall?
Well, that's where antivirus software comes in.
Okay.
It's like the city guard patrolling the streets looking for suspicious activity.
Right.
So antivirus scans all the files and programs looking for known malware, quarantining or removing any threats it can find.
Okay, so firewall and antivirus, those are the essentials.
Right.
Are there other security measures that a Windows admin should be aware of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Security, it's a multi-layered approach.
Okay.
So in addition to firewalls and antivirus, you've also got to think about things like strong passwords.
Right.
In enforcing those complex passwords and multi-factor authentication helps prevent unauthorized access.
Yeah.
It's like having extra locks on the city gates. Regular updates are important too.
Okay.
Keeping software up to date is really crucial for patching up any security vulnerabilities. It's
Yeah.
like you're reinforcing the city walls to prevent any breaches.
Okay.
And the user education.
Okay.
That's really important too, training users to recognize those phishing scams and other social engineering tactics.
Yeah.
It's like you're teaching the citizens to be aware of dangers and how to avoid them.
So security, it's like an ongoing thing,
Absolutely.
constantly adapting to new threats and vulnerabilities.
All the time.
It's amazing to think about all the work that goes into keeping our digital world running smoothly and securely. It's one of those things you don't think about until something goes wrong.
It's true.
Speaking of things going wrong, I'm curious to know, what are some of the biggest challenges that Windows administrators face day to day?
Well, one of the biggest is just dealing with the unexpected.
Okay.
Technology is always changing and new problems can come up at any time. So you might find a software bug that you've never seen before, a hardware failure that takes down a critical server, or a security threat that exploits a vulnerability that nobody knew about.
Wow. So you really have to be adaptable and able to think on your feet.
Oh yeah, 100%. Being a Windows administrator, it's all about being resourceful, finding those creative solutions and learning fast.
Okay.
And you got to be able to work well under pressure, because when those systems go down, everyone's looking at you to fix it and fix it quickly.
I can imagine those high-pressure situations are pretty stressful.
Yeah.
What are some of the other challenges?
Well, another one is keeping up with all the changes in technology.
Okay.
It's constantly evolving. You've got new operating systems, new applications, new security threats popping up all the time.
Yeah.
A good Windows administrator has to always be learning, always expanding their knowledge and their skill set to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not a job for somebody who's afraid to learn new things.
Definitely not.
What about working with users? I imagine that can be challenging at times.
Yeah, sometimes users can be one of the biggest challenges,
Okay.
but sometimes they're the biggest rewards.
Okay. How so?
You might have users who are frustrated, confused, don't like change,
Right.
but then you get to help them solve problems. empower them to actually use technology and make their lives easier.
That's great.
Yeah,
It sounds like a role that requires a lot of patience, empathy, and a genuine desire to help people.
it does.
So we've talked about the technical skills, the problem-solving communication skills, that security-first mindset, the patience of a saint, and people skills. Is there anything else that's essential for being a successful Windows administrator?
Um, yeah, one more thing that's often overlooked is attention to detail.
Okay.
Small mistakes can have big consequences in this role.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You have to be super meticulous in your work, double-checking settings, carefully documenting procedures, and making sure everything is perfect.
It sounds like a job that requires a lot of focus and precision. So to sum up, a successful Windows administrator needs a strong technical foundation, good at solving problems, great communicator, security first mindset, super patient, and a really good eye for detail. Does that about cover it?
You got it. You
Yeah.
got it. It's tough, but it's a rewarding role for
Mhm.
sure. You're the one keeping everything running smoothly, so people can do their jobs and connecting everybody to the digital world.
And it sounds like you're always learning and facing new challenges, which keeps things exciting.
Yeah, definitely never a dull moment when you're a Windows administrator. And as technology keeps changing, the role is just going to become more and more important.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. I feel like we've explored every side of being a Windows administrator, from the technical details of Active Directory and DNS to how crucial security is and those personal qualities you need to be successful.
Yeah, it's a role that people don't often notice until something breaks, but it's really the backbone of how organizations work these days.
And it's definitely not just about technical skills you need to solve problems. Be a good communicator, kind of like a detective, a security expert, and maybe even a therapist sometimes.
Yeah, it's a unique mix of skills, but for those people who like challenges and like working with technology, it can be a really fulfilling career.
So for anyone listening who's thinking about a career in Windows administration, what advice would you give them?
I'd say be curious,
Yeah.
be persistent, and don't be afraid to just get in there and try things out.
Yeah.
There are so many resources out there online, Microsoft documentation, community forums, virtual labs where you can really learn and experiment.
And don't be afraid to break stuff in a safe environment. Of course,
Hmm.
sometimes that's the best way to learn.
Exactly. The more you experiment and try to fix things, the better you'll get at it. And also, don't forget about networking. Connect with other IT people, go to conferences, join online communities. The IT world is all about working together and sharing what you know.
This deep dive has definitely given me a new appreciation for Windows administrators. It's one of those jobs that most of us don't even know exists, but it's essential for keeping our digital world running.
Yeah, it's kind of like the engine room of a ship. You don't see it, but if it stops working, everything grinds to a halt.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
to all our listeners out there, whether you're getting ready for a job interview, thinking about switching careers, or just curious about how things work behind the scenes, we hope this deep dive has given you some good insights into the world of Windows administration.
And remember, technology never stops changing. So there's always something new to learn. Embrace the challenges, stay curious, and keep exploring.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one keeping the digital world up and running. Until next time, happy learning.